Дайте надо начать. And today is our final lecture of the second part of the theoretical program of online laboratory and residency of Unthinking, Unlearning Sonic Theories and Praxis. And we are more than happy that you're with us tonight and that you joined our program. And I'm really grateful to present our speaker, Evgeny Bylina, and his topic for today's lecture is going to be Jurgensen frequency, listening as hallucination, listening as desire, listening as fiction. And Evgeny Bylina is a cultural theorist, philosopher, lecturer at Art and Design School at Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and he's editor and New Literary Observer publishing house. And he's one of the curators of Unthinking Unlearning Laboratory. And tonight he's going to speak about how to consider the various listening modes that arise in a connection with the phenomenon of EVP, which is electronic voice phenomenon. And he will analyze through the prism of psychoanalysis, phenomenology, and media theory that will allow him and us as well to rearise the question of the nature of listening, the relationships between sound, voice, and technology, and as well to analyze the sonic subject as well as itself. And I'm more than happy to give all the floor to Evgeny. You can start your lectures.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, everyone who is listening to me today. So I will share my screen for the presentation, and we will start. Yeah, so I think it's okay already. Well, you will have an opportunity to ask me a question after my report. I want to add. So, discourse on the spectral nature of sound has become quite a commonplace within sound research and sound studies. The metaphor of the ghost is an apt description of the state of modern culture, which is trapped within a temporal paradox between the past, present, and future, has become the synonymous to the mediality itself. Something that we call the essence of the ghost, the temporal gap, the being between not yet and no longer, turns out to be incredibly consonant with all what we call the postmodern state. Popular music of the early 21st century, especially electronic music, reflected this paradox well. However, today I want to talk not about this, or rather, today's lecture will be a continuation of a development of such plot in relation not so much to a certain music, but to sound in general, to sound and its relationship to technology, body. The lecture will be actually about the desire of sound to be something more. During the lecture, we will try to reveal two themes. The first is that the history of sound recording is always haunted by ghosts, and sound is ultimately inseparable from the ghostly. The second is that the place of this tension, of this paradox, is a voice coming from nowhere. So, ghost really haunts the sound through its history. The sound recording actually is only showed this moment in full. Since ancient times, sound and music have been associated with the transcendental, a necessary part of ritual, since it was the most direct and effective kind of art. Whether it was the voice of God, whether it was the flute of Dionysus, or the angelic voices and the music of the spheres in the Middle Ages. A similar connection continues to exist in post-secular era, a time when religion is no longer the key way of understanding the world. Music continues to be a guide to the supramundane within romantic art, a way to articulate and express the ultimate states that are inaccessible to the other figurative forms of art. So, the thesis, the sound recording, as well as other forms actually of technical reproducibility, has freed and revealed ghosts to the world is beyond doubt, at least because it coincided with the spread within Western European culture of specific forms of religiosity, which became particularly relevant in the 20th century. So next slide, but I don't know why it is, oh yeah, it's working. So it is worth mentioning two modes of connection with transcendental developed in 19th and 20th century. The first one was the sacred, the legitimate form provided by the ritual conventions of official religious doctrine and dogma, which actually nevertheless have no direct relation to the divine. And the second path is the supernatural, is a kind of vernacular form connected with everyday life actually, which involves attention to the various agents, angels, demons, ghosts, aliens, reptilians, spiritual entities, fetishized objects, etc., with which we can communicate with other world. So, spiritualism, which is inextricably embedded in the history of the technical revolution, especially in sound recording, is a second form of communication with the transcendental. Spiritualism was actually a strange form that simultaneously relied on the Darwin science of the Enlightenment and on the other implied the existence of a sphere beyond human life. Traditionally, spiritualism is described as the first example of an reenchantment of the West, as Christopher Petrovich called it, which became especially relevant in the 20th century under the name of various New Age and theosophical movements and teachings. Spiritualism is actually a reaction to the total rationalization of all spheres of life in late Victorian and late modern eras and so on. Spiritualists believe in the existence of post-mortal world and the belief that it can be achieved by various technical means, and actually that the sound is the key medium for this achievement, formed a further discussion about the nature sound of such. It formed actually the discourse about essence of listening and what role technology playing in it. Actually, here is an example of ghosts photographs, which were very popular in spiritualist movements. So, ambitions of the pioneers of the media revolution who played a key role in the creation of modern sound media. For example, Alexander Bell, Thomas Edison, Oliver Lodge, Guglielmo Marconi, Nikola Tesla, and many others suggested that electricity and electromagnetic waves could serve not only as means of communication between the living, but also with the dead. We can remember a lot of examples, for example, Morse code communication, Bell's telepathic devices, Thomas Edison dreams of creating a spiritualistic telephone, as well as proclaiming the phonograph as a device that can overcome death, because actually we can hear the voice of those who are no longer with us. Yeah. We also can remember the dreams of Guglielmo Marconi, who believes that sounds do not disappear, but only become quieter. And if we want, we can build a receiver strong enough to hear anything. Actually, he believes that we can hear the Sermon on the Mount. In any case, sound recording and other forms of technical art, in the beginning of them, were associated with the death. Yeah, actually. We believe that this has happened so not only because the death was not so taboo and, if I can say, sterilized uh, that time that today, but also because it is allow us to rethink actually um, rationalized discourse about nature, sound, about sound nature and speech actually. The ghost world has always lived in the midst of telephone interference and radio waves. And one of the media theorists and literal theorist, Navetal Ronel, said very popular phrase that the phone has always been inhabited by the rhetoric of the departed. So, as we have already noted, the attempt to hear voices of the dead to prove their existence by means of technical or by technical means of reproducibility was a characteristic feature of the early sound experiments. However, these attempts reached their maximum intensity in the second half of the 20th century. There may be several reasons for this, but the most relevant, I think, and most important, it is because this means of reproducing sound and transmitting it become universally available, and moreover have shown their social and political influence. Radio and telephony radically changed the social existence and reception of the surrounding world, largely due to the fact that they were able to deform, stretch, or on the contrary collapse our usual understanding of time and space. They were able to finally blur the line between the private and the public. Moreover, between the real and the fictional, artificial, ephemeral. One of the first media theories, Günther Anders, which quote is on my presentation, wrote in his book devoted to the phenomenology of radio and other wireless media, The Phantom and the Matrix, wrote that modern media create a kind of ghostly doppelganger of our real world, just actually because the ability to destroy the illusion of the wholeness of the world. Moreover, the phantom world of new media does not merge with our real world, but completely replaces it. It is not only about commodity fetishism and images that are imposed by mass culture, but statement is also about the reception itself, mediated by technical means. We actually all turn out to be ghosts in some way, as Günther Anders actually said this in this extract. However, we need to return to the voices that come from nowhere. In late 50s, Swedish artist, filmmaker, and producer Friedrich Jurgenson recorded birds from his garden using a microphone and tape recorder. Later, as he played back a tape of the recorded sounds, he heard what could not possibly be consistent with the actual soundscape. The voice of his dead father and his wife, who had died of an illness, and she was calling out his name. Later, Jurgensen was engaged in similar searches and recordings for several years, and claimed that he had the voices of not only his relatives, but also historical characters, among others Hitler and Göring. In 1967, he published a book called Radio Link with the Dead, where he described the search mechanism in detail and also shared the opinion that Pope Paul VI, about whom Jurgensen was then making a film, received his ideas with great enthusiasm, actually. It is not surprising that a special frequency is named after here, which is perceived by ghost catchers and EVP enthusiasts as the most successful, between 1450 and 1600 kilohertz on amplitude modulation. So, nevertheless, the most profound and detailed manifestation of such phenomena, of electronic voice phenomenon, was made by a follower of Jurgensen, a Latvian psychologist, one of the Carl Gustav Jung students, Konstantin Raudive. Impressed by Jurgensen experiments, Raudive decided to repeat them. And as a result, he wrote the book Breakthrough, which became very popular. And even William Burroughs devoted 1 or 2 lectures and several essays to it. So Raudive developed not only an incredibly detailed method of communicating with the dead using technical means. He used various techniques, combining microphone, tape recorder, radio, diode, etc. He not only classified the voices according to their degree of clarity, but also marked the initial intention of his enterprise. First, he made certain demands of the listening subject. Listening to voices from nowhere, is a specific type of listening, completely intentional, implying not only practice and experience, but also a certain kind of desire. And this is, I think, the most important point. Secondly, he described in detail the specific mode of speech of ghosts, the structure of their polysemantic language that uses the resources of different languages. One of his hypotheses of such, that there is glossolalia actually, was the belief that ghosts fell back into childhood, become children when they came to the post-mortal life. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Raudive manifested his method as completely scientific, based on empirical data, and completely opposite to both the theological spiritualist beliefs and the alternative version associated with the unconscious. And in this regard, he denied his involvement in psychoanalysis, considering it as a form of science fiction. Here is some describe a mode how ghost connects with us, the ear, and I want to share you with some examples about what we're actually talking today. So this is a compilation, The Ghost Orchid, an introduction to EVP. It consists not only Raudive's original recordings, which were complemented with the book Breakthrough. Yeah, here it is. There was a 7-inch LP. But most of them were made by Raymond Cass, another and more younger EVP enthusiast. And I will just play 2 or 3 of them that you have an idea what is.
Doing 847, check Dogger 270, Blue Velvet 44. Doing 847, check Dogger 270, Blue Velvet 44. Doing 847, check Dogger 270, Blue Velvet 44.
Наряду с такими относительно невинными
Yeah, so as you listened, Ghost very well known about Russian language actually. But usually more detailed and more longer messages are based on using several of them by mixing, for example, German, French, English, Latvian, Russian, etc. There are several scientific and well-founded criticism of the EVP phenomenon that we actually absolutely share. One of them is techno-scientific, The other is related to psychoacoustics. The first explains EVP by the presence of interference, random modulation, and other breakdowns that inevitably occur with analog equipment. Only it is used by voice catchers. The second is related to apophenia, psychic phenomena, and ability of human consciousness to give meaning and understandable form to unknown structures, especially if they are repeated. One of the key methods of voice recognition is the repetition of the recording, as you listen at it as examples. Curiously, Raudive tries to preemptively challenge both of these positions by labeling his necromantic research with the scientific method. Preferring further discussion, it should be said that it is the bet on rationality that causes skepticism among the majority. Moreover, it causes skepticism that the key organ of knowledge in Raudive research becomes the ear, an organ that actually has never been associated with analytical knowledge and actually cannot be associated. So, 20th century media theory has made a number of radical observations about how technology has changed our reception, our everyday experience, and how our judgments about this experience are presupposed and based on by our sensory apparatus. Walter Benjamin, in an incredibly famous essay about work of art in the era of its technical reproducibility, wrote that the new techniques, in his case for photography and film camera, were able to capture that what is usually escapes from our eyes. The non-selectivity of the lens, according to him, allowed us to release the forces of the unconscious, which influenced us but were not fixed by actually our reception. Yeah, it is not for nothing that the emergence of the psychoanalysis coincides with the technical revolution. Freud's fascination with telephony is well known in the context of our topic. In a number of essays, he noted that about similarity of telephone communication and electricity with the psychoanalytic interpretation of dreams. Both of them turn out to be a decoding process of symbolic messages and language. Relationship between psychoanalysis and new media was further developed by the German media theorist Friedrich Kittler, who compared Jacques Lacan's methodological distinction between the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic with sound recording, film, and print writing, respectively. Here is the schema. The symbolic is contained in the materiality of the sign itself. It's imprinted on a sheet of paper. It is the ability of the word to have multiple meanings. The imaginary reveals itself in the cinema because it is an inversion, some kind of mirror projection, distortion of our reality, or even multiplication of it. The real, what is random, and he's called the stochastic disorder of our own bodies, is actually captured with a phonograph. The crucial fact about phonograph is that it does not care what is recorded on it. In this sense, it is the direct opposite of the ear, which is selective in relation to any acoustic events. Yeah, we're not listening everything. We're listening actually what have some meaning for us. So phonography can record an event in its maximum immediacy, bypassing any semiotic order and linguistic meaning. It is actually not surprising that the space of a plate or magnetic tape has become so beloved by ghosts. It is not for nothing to mention that Kittler records the notion of archi-écriture or archi-writing by Jacques Derrida believing that the simple structure of difference and trace is realized in the mechanism in the Edison phonograph. Its ability to read and write with the same gesture, yeah, by only pointing a needle on a metal plate or vinyl plate, etc. Already in this question, we can see the problem that is always associated with sound and writing, sound recording, in the name of phonograph itself. Actually, phone on Greek is voice and graphos is writing. The key conflict of sound studies is not the peculiar audiovisual litanies, which mentioned by Jonathan Stern, and about what Ksenia Mayorova already said, and about what already said Nikita Safonov on our lecture course. Yeah, there's some kind of conflict between visual and auditory and the audible, actually. Yeah, but I think the most prominent and most crucial conflict in sound studies is a conflict between writing and sound, voice and language, actually. This conflict once again manifests itself in the technique and its relation to death. The phonograph is able to identify the voice, preserve it even after death, but at the same time, it alienates, mediates the voice from its owner, marks its absence. What time is it? Okay. It is widely known that linguistics does not know sounds, despite the fact that Saussure speaks some kind of the acoustic image of a word. He meets its silent version, an imprint or sign which cannot be associated with sound materiality. Linguistics, in order to describe the sound imprint of a word, uses a phoneme, and phonology is a science that studies phonemes. We could argue that our speech consists not only of words, but of random unintentional sounds such as coughing, bellowing, intonation, etc. But these translinguistic objects can also be subordinated to the meaning matrix and can be described as a part of language. Nevertheless, the unique and subjective properties of the voice, its sonorous dimension, is able to modulate and distort the writing, actually. And in this case, we should talk about maybe the most individual parameter of our own voice, timbre. Moreover, voice is a kind of introduction to the meaning. It's indicating an intimate connection with the meaning, with the sign. It is some kind of mark about that we want to say something. Traditionally, in the phenomenological commentary by Jacques Derrida, actually in the book in Voice and Phenomenon, he describes the relation between voice and language. And there is an opposition between them. If language is a repetitive sign system based on difference and trace, then the voice is an attempt to make up for the lost presence, to bring with the help of speech the illusion of the self-affectation, self-transparency. Even if we speak alone to ourselves, we thereby make ourselves aware of our existence, actually. And Derrida used two formulas, la voix s'entend, to hear and actually to understand our voice. Entendre is have multiple meanings in French. And verb vouloir dire, which is he brings out from Husserlian analysis and transcribe it like some kind of desire and will to say. So the voice is opposed to writing, actually. And later, Jacques Derrida develops quite a detailed history of metaphysics between these two modes of expression. Slovenian philosopher Mladen Dolar, who wrote perhaps the most profound book about voice, the voice and nothing more, criticized Derrida, believing that in psychoanalysis, the self-affective voice of self-presence, the self-possession, is always in contrast with its reverse side, the voice of the other, a voice that we cannot control. So, in Dolar terms, there is no opposition between voice and writing. There is a position between two types of voices, actually. The voice, according to Dolar, is a really complex place, which is by no means limited to the ability to communicate and prove one's own existence. There is always a certain residue in the voice that cannot be reduced to meaning and actually to presence. Materiality of the voice makes Dolar turn to the idea that the voice turned out to be a link that connects language with the body. However, this bodily mechanism is manifested in the most tangible material form, and therefore the more persistence, as he says. The first obvious quality of the voice is that it disappears as soon as it produces. There is a popular proverb, Latin, verba volant scripta manent, words fly away, what is written remains. And actually, Jacques Lacan, also psychoanalyst, argues that this proverb must be reversed. The voice remains in the place where it was spoken forever, where it was born and dies simultaneously, while the letters fly away and form a whirlpool of history. The voice, according to Dolar, is a gap, never reduced to either materiality or sign, but somehow this empty space ensures the union of the body and languages. So, there is no voice without a body, actually, yeah? But this attitude is filled with pitfalls. It seems that the voice does not belong, actually, to the body, or is not completely adapted to it. You can actually try listening yourself in recording, and you will be impressed that that is actually not my voice. Yeah, and Pedro Oliveira actually said about this thesis already on previous lecture. This complexity and this problem of the voice was contained in the concept of the acousmatic voice, which was developed by Michel Chion and further established by Baden Dolar. Acousmatic voice is simply a voice whose source we cannot identify and localize. So EVP voices is as an example of working of such voice mechanism, yeah. Of course, with the advent of technology, the acousmatism of voice become ubiquitous. Radio, gramophone, tape recorder, and telephone begin to act as some kind of substitute for the invisible missing source, acting as itself as a doppelganger, which we already mentioned. To describe that phenomenon, Dolar reanimates perhaps the most important episode of the European literature of the 20th century, related to sound studies, to listening, and voice. Yeah, this is an episode from In Search of a Lost Time by Marcel Proust, where the protagonist calls to his own grandmother. Hearing her own voice on the phone, the hero was horrified by how different it was from the image of his grandmother's voice that he knew. There is a first quotation, and I think you read it already, and there is a second one. Yeah, means of technical reproducibility, such as telephone, on the one hand created even more intense illusion of presence, more real than reality itself. But in the same time, this kind of voice turns out to be a sign of separation, proof of the impossibility of presence, a ghost actually of presence. The voice separated from the body resembles the voice of death. So, one could answer this objection, but that it is possible to de-acousmatize the voice, by which we will restore the lost connection between the language and the body by establishing actually the source of this voice. However, Dolar convincingly shows that the source of the voice can never be seen. It comes from a mystery. It cannot coincide with what we can see. Again, I encourage you to remember the banal experience, how sometimes it is difficult for us to associate a voice with a particular person. So, the desire to identify random sounds with the voices of the dead, which Konstantin Raudive insists on, is what in psychoanalysis is called negativity of desire. A principle that promotes meaning is addressed to other, but in fact that can never be exhausted in the other. All this allows to make, all these positions allows Dolar to make a paradoxical conclusion. Despite the fact that the voice connects the language with the body, it does not belong to either one or the other. It is layered. It is like overcome each other, yeah, between two spheres, body and language. This is some kind of gap and cross point of these two spheres of expression, yeah. And he reminds us topology of the le petit objet A, the small object, the object of small a, which is crucial for Lacanian psychoanalysis. I will pass this example, well, not, I will say that with this picture about Brent, his master's voice, and picture which is named also on that, I think is an ideal illustration which describes how listening actually works, listening to the voice, yeah? The history of this picture says this. The dog Nipper, called Nipper, listens to the voice of his deceased master, believing that what comes from the gramophone is also him, yeah. Here the fundamental duality is most clearly revealed. The acousmatic voice cannot be demystified with the help of a visual frame. On the contrary, it makes it more problematic and mysterious. The voice have some kind of double structure, as already said, connected on the one hand with the intimacy, self-disclosure, but on the same time it turns to be a way to subdue the other, power over him. One could argue that phone, voice, is just only one special case of sound, and there are different types of sound, a lot of them. However, the French theorist of sound studies, François Banet, who were mentioned yesterday by Nikita, in his book The Order of Sounds, convincingly shows us that the sound, in order to become audible, to become meaningful, not necessarily have to leave a trace, an imprint, but also it should manifest itself as a kind of voice, to show some desire to be said, to speak, even without the operation of signification. In this intentionality of sound and listening, that makes it possible to turn the sound into actual acoustical event, which is related to listener. Perhaps it is already logical that Banet connects such things with mechanisms of desire, hallucination, fictionality, including briefly mentioning the phenomenon of EVP also. Listening is always listening to something that we want to hear actually again, yeah, like repetition. Listening always involves a reciprocal relationship between the one who hears and the audible itself, yeah. Moreover, listening always contains a component of fictionality. There is some kind of desire, which Banet called listening drive, that produces this fictionality, makes actually this voice speakable to us. Yeah, all of François Banet, the constructive enterprise, is actually directed against with the so-called reduced listening, an idea developed by French composer and theorist Pierre Schaeffer, whose final gesture was to access sound as an independent object that would be free from any semantic and cultural connotation. But Bonnet discovers that such operation cannot be final. By objectifying the sound, actually, yeah, when we reduce it, yeah, we also moving away from it, trying to ontologize it, and moreover, endowing it with a structural grid of signification and or some kind of different order. Schaeffer himself called it typomorphology. Schaeffer's rationalizing impulse, according to Bonnet, does not take to account one main thing: the will of the subject, actually himself, his desires, his aspiration, the additional meaning that he brings with him with the help of his ear and voice. Listening is actually always associated with emptiness, lack, something that cannot be said, but is nevertheless heard. For example, the EVP phenomenon is an attempt to compensate for such listening, an attempt to complete the absence that inevitably occurs in our act of listening. So, in this context, I would like to mention one small fragment from Maurice Merleau-Ponty, French phenomenologist, which I think can summarize not only our discussion today, but also all of the stakes of sound studies, actually. The radical difference that sound and listening bring in relation to the other types of sensuality. I'm quite surprised when I prepared this lecture during my investigations that this fragment is hardly mentioned by anyone. Only François Bonnet actually mentioned it. So, in the phenomenology of perception, he writes, and I will read it full. In the same way, I hear the hardness and unevenness of cobbles in the rattle of carriage, and we speak appropriately of a soft, dull, and sharp sound. Through one may doubt whether the sense of hearing brings us genuine things. It is at least certain that it presents us, beyond the sound in space, with something which sounds, and in this way communicates with other senses. Finally, if my eyes closed, I bend a steel bar and lime branch, I perceive in my hands the most essential texture of the metal on the wood. If then taken as incomparable qualities, the data of different senses belong to so many separate worlds, each one in its particular essence being a manner of modulating the thing. They all communicate through their significant core. It is quite complicated, actually, yeah. So I'll try to elaborate what he says in this fragment. In this fragment, Merleau-Ponty speaks not only about the need for the coherence of all the senses. Thus, we again question the so-called audiovisual litanies, which has become quite prevalent in contemporary sound studies. Yeah, a confrontation of visual and sound that is becomes actually useless. So, because if some of the senses will be absent, we will be dealing with phantoms. And actually, that's where this ghosts of Constantin Raudive come from. Yeah, because when there is some kind of lack of another sense, we trapped in some kind of not phenomenology, but phantomology, by a world of phantoms. Actually, trying to example. For example, you can watch a cinema without sound. It can be, or with another soundtrack, and it can be really surrealistic and connected with some uncanny features. Yeah, but also in this fragment, Merleau-Ponty posits that sound may be not localized. We cannot know, sometimes we cannot know its essence, its origins. We do not know what it is, but we always know that sounds actually sounds, acts as verb. Sound thus communicates not some ideal quality, an absolute idea, an image, but rather it communicates itself, its own sound, its own sounding, which at the same time can indicate and mean something. It is not necessarily a ready and existing object or idea. Rather, it registers its own ability to communicate about the unreported, about the boundary between the sense and nonsense. So it is communication of the uncommunicative, according to Jean-Luc Nancy, who inherits the phenomenological intention of Merleau-Ponty, and that the definition is actually underlines listening and turns out to be its primary task. We have now, again, we can trace back to Francois Bonnet, to his idea about ontology of sound. Francois Bonnet posits that there is no essence of sound, and therefore there is no ontology of sound to be discovered or established. Francois Bonnet shows us that all regimes of ontologizing sound is regimes based on some authority, but crucial distinction and difference of sound to another sense is that it actually have no inherent essence, yeah, as he said. So we can establish only some kind of, as he called it, sonorous archipelago, some kind of zones of discursive analysis, but sound remains actually just a sound and just a verb, but it is posed us to quite different epistemology, contrary to the epistemology of previous history, actually. So, interestingly, it is interesting that I tried to not mention the word hauntology, portmanteau word developed by Jacques Derrida, which turned out to be a very favorable term to describing modern musical culture. Yeah, and some kind of genres of electronic music and visual arts, for example, and photography, etc. Hauntology derived from the verb to haunt, and the noun ontology, actually it should spell on French as ontology, ontologie. Yeah, because arch is not spelling in French. So it's often considered in the mainstream of the philosophy. Well, actually, it is considered with the philosophy of history as a certain way of being signs and objects that do not belong to either the dead or the living. I tried to show during my lectures that actually this concept is applicable not only in the cultural aspect, but also in the description of sound and language, their relationship as such. The figure of a ghost who can utter the paradoxical phrase, I'm dead or je suis mort, from the novel of Edgar Poe, turns out to be the very mechanism of difference and trace, telling us that sound and voice are not separable from signification. Yeah, this is quite sad thesis, which is, I argue, contrary to a modern ontology-based presuppositions around sound and other medias, but it is my opinion. So, in some way, we are always doomed, yeah, to this duality, to experience the gap between language and sound, between these two types of expression, yeah, which we actually can only experience by listening these ghost voices. I'm finished. Thank you all. Wow, I even took less time than I expected.
Thank you so much for your lecture. And I'm encouraging you all again to ask questions in a chat both in Zoom and YouTube. And we have some time for Q&A because, as you said,
we have plenty of time.
We finished a bit earlier. And I have kind of more personal question for the start is, as I can see, there is now a tendency towards research of spiritual or ritual practices in a contemporary art, especially sound art, as you mentioned, and in sound studies as well. So, and like, for example, your lecture now, it's also driven by the spiritual and ritual research. So maybe you can explain both on your example and on general, why do you see this tendency? Why is it happening?
To answer this question, I must to give another lecture actually, and I wrote a text about this problem. It is called Ghost Rave of Fourier, and it is published in Russian on Sigma, and I can send a link to it for everyone who wants to read it. Well, if in short, I think that everyone become interested in some transcendental, some spiritness, some sacred, some discourse of another mode of knowledge based not on science but on belief, is actually happening because of some kind of some kind of problem that is become evident during the 20th century, mainly because of 2 world wars, Holocaust, and actually fall of Enlightenment project. And after that, such re-enchantment become more evident in various theoretical programs, and various thinkers started to ask questions about metaphysics and epistemologics, according or using some notions developed inside in theological knowledge or in some kind of again vernacular forms of religiosity, and religion itself became some kind of theoretical other, which can bring us some new insights about how do we live in the modern world. And also another meaning, another reason why we are all aware about ghosts and spirits is, I think, because of media expansion, and because media became so connected with us, because media proven us like an eternal archive. Internet is an example of Babylonian bibliothèque, from Jorge Luis Borges' short story, with which we need to somehow relate, but we do not know how actually speak with those fragments of the past, or even fragments of the futures that is condemned to be forever in the past. So I think there's 2 main reasons for that.
Thank you so much for your answer. And we have it will be great if you can send the text and I can share and spread it around. And we have another question in chat, but I'm gonna read it out loud, so ones who watching from YouTube could also see it. It's how you can comment on the metaphor of nature voices, murmuring, howling, rustling. Non-human agents have bodies as well, voices, but not languages. So how does Dolar schema works for them?
Actually, Dolar schema, I don't think that he is really preoccupied with the theme about of non-human agents, but I think that this is not only because of his unawareness of that kind of problem. I believe so that he thinks about it, but when it comes to some kind of mode of communication, we are everyone will be a human or not human, agent or non-agent. We are all condemned to the such field of signifying, yeah, to the such a field of tension between body and sign, which could be described phenomenologically or psychoanalytically or in other way. But if we comment this kind of chirping, murmuring, howling, rustling, it actually Dolar actually points it in his book, and he points of all the things as some kind of translinguistical objects. They cannot be some kind of language in a proper sense with proper relation with the signifier and significant, yeah. But actually, this some kind of murmuring, howling, rustling, especially in a situation, actually with a human communication, because only a human can have pragmatics, yeah, can speak in a context, yeah. I do not believe that non-human agents, for example, as dog or something else, could do it. So they also can be described in linguistical metrics. But also, again, I want to point that this voice tension is always connected not only to the practice of signification, but is also connected with the material dimension of voice, about throat, yeah? And also it is connected, that is what I said, but maybe not I mentioned it properly, because the main communication is about communication itself. When we speak something, we can say absolutely nonsense, but we will tell that we can actually speak, yeah? We can communicate of uncommunicative, yeah? And I think that sound is the primarily thing that do this, actually. But yeah, well, I don't think that psychoanalysis of animals is possible. But actually, he uses an example with that with this dog Nipper on his master's voice picture, trying to explicate that in listening there is also a component of obedience, yeah, that there is a tension between to rule of the other and to be subsued by him, by him.
Thank you for your answer. And we have another question, which is, if I'm not mistaken, in your talk, in your speech, you mentioned that it's difficult to associate a voice with a body, with a concrete, with the exact person. But isn't it what most of the sound art works do when they usually speak about identity through the voice? For example, feminist sound art practice or LGBTQ plus practice.
Yeah, there is quite critique, I think, in my description and well, description of some kind of wise thinkers about it, that actually voice sometimes cannot be a principle of identity, actually, because as Dolar says, that when we speak as ventriloquist. It is actually a voice of our voice, but there is some kind of gap, which is actually marks that the voice is not belong only to us, but to the other. And I think actually that we can make, based on this presupposition, some kind of work based on voice as primary media, yeah. For example, in post-colonial kind of artistic expression, voice is always modulated, trying to re-understand what is voice are. For example, in black electronic music or a black sound art, there will always component of using vocoder of such effects, which is distorts voice to be unrecognizable, to be something entirely different. And I think that my main point to show that this radical difference consists actually all the time, but we can develop it to elaborate it or trying to hide it contrarily. But I think the second strategy is, well, the first strategy in my answer is more interesting actually, and more powerful, I think. Yeah, but this is quite a nice question to think whether it's possible actually identity politics based on voice. Maybe even not. But maybe we are talk about different voices actually. This is maybe yeah, maybe there is several voices which we need to discover. So I do not have actual a proper question.
Yeah, I think the policy of thinking about not one voice but many of them, it's interesting way of thinking and researching. And if we have no more questions, I think it's a pretty good time to conclude our lecture, and I want to thank you. And I think people just need some time to rethink all about it and consider what's going on in a sense.
We will meet with them tomorrow actually, and we'll
yeah, with one who are participant of our lab, but for others, I think you're more than happy to receive any questions and answer them.
Yeah. I always open for that, so anyone can text me.
Oh, sorry, you can continue.
Yeah. Anyone can text me and I will reply for any question.
Okay, so thank you again for lecture, for Q&A session, and I'm inviting you all to join us on Saturday. The next lecture is going to be on Saturday, and the last block of our program, and the last part of our theoretical program. And I'm thanking again everybody who made this event possible, and thanks for our translator Nadezhda who helped us tonight.
Yes, thank you, Nadezhda. Really, I think I was really fast, maybe.
So yeah, see you next time. Goodbye, everyone, and thanks again.
Thanks again. Yeah. У нас трансляция закончилась. Надежда, а вы тут? Или вышла? Ладно.